Hello and welcome to another episode of R&R's Ask the Expert. I'm Kayla McGowan, editor-in-chief, and today we're talking about repairing the restoration triangle, which includes human barriers, 360 documentation, and technology that builds trust in the claims ecosystem. If you haven't guessed it, it's my returning guest and my friend here, Robb Harrell, who is the Vice President of Strategic Accounts at DocuSketch. Welcome, Rob.
Hey, Kayla, thank you very much, ma'am. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so excited to have you on and kind of talk about this. I know you wrote this piece about a year ago now, but this year it just seems to fit right into the trend of all of the conferences we're going to. And so, I wanted to share it again with our audience and have you shed some light on some things that maybe have changed or stayed the same. And if they have stayed the same, what does that look like for our industry? So, for those who haven't had the chance to read Rob's article, it talks about the fractured restoration triangle, which is the claims ecosystem at the end of the day. And this year so far, we've seen so much attention around the claims ecosystem. From your perspective, what is the biggest human-driven barrier that still prevents contractors, adjusters, and carriers from working as a unified claims ecosystem?
Yeah. So before I answer the question, though, I recently found out, at least going back to the origin of who actually came up with the definition of the restoration triangle. And unfortunately, one of my heroes, Mickey Lee, had passed away. And from what I've been able to gather, me and Pete Consiglia were having a conversation, and it basically came up that Mickey Lee was the one that potentially created the term, the restoration triangle, because of the three people involved. Three people involved to define it very quickly. It's the contractor, it's the carrier if a carrier is involved, and it's I would say, the property owner. And the reason why I'm using that term is because it could be a commercial property. So, or whoever's responsible for that commercial property. It doesn't always mean it's a homeowner that's involved. So,
No, and I
but
would say, I would say, sorry to cut you off, but for those
no,
of you watching, like Mickey Lee, pioneer of the industry, right? Let's take a moment and just,
yes,
he brought so much to this industry. I'm so thankful that I was actually able to work with him for a majority of my career while I was at the IICRC. I learned so much from him. There was a couple of times he spoke at some of the events we had, and man, talk about a wealth of knowledge, right? And to no surprise, I am not surprised he's the one that came up with the restoration triangle, but those that's just one of those things that's going to continue to live through us. So super excited that you shared that with us. And, for those of you listening and watching, and, Mickey was one of the good ones. We have so many great people in this industry. We've lost so many great people in the last couple of years. And so, thanks, Rob, for sharing that little insight because that obviously inspired something in this piece. And I'm so glad that we got to kind of bring it back to where it comes from. So with that being said, what's your thought on the
yeah.
barriers that we see?
So, and again, I hope I can, God rest his soul, Mickey, I can do some justice in how I describe this because he's so influential to so many people. But here's the problem I see. That restoration triangle, the one I just defined, policyholder, insurance professional, and the restoration contractor, that triangle, it's not broken today because people are incompetent. It's broken today because communication systems haven't kept pace with the volume, the scale, the opportunity. So what I mean by that is what I see as the biggest barrier is assumption. Now, unlike most people in the audience, I've worn every one of those hats. I've had losses from a property standpoint. I've been a restoration contractor and I also worked on the insurance side. And here's what I think is going on. Contractors are assuming adjusters understand field activities. Adjusters assume contractors understand policy constraints. And the carriers assume both understand what that risk modeling looks like and the cost containment around it. And so we have three siloed people all trying to fight for their own interest. And I think a lot of times the breakdown and the speed, like I got back to that volume, that scale, that digitization, we've lost that personal connection. So I think that's kind of the overarching drive here from my desk.
Yeah, and I would definitely say too, we're all really focused on the age of technology right now, but also still
Oh,
customer service. And so things do get lost in translation, which, we all have our strengths and our weaknesses, which can sometimes get in the way while we're still trying to learn, adapt, and evolve. But, I think you said it best. We're all trying to work towards our goal, right? And sometimes our goals aren't necessarily the same as the person sitting next to us who's trying to help us through the process. So I think for those of you listening, to better understand why this is so important, Verisk, Cotality, several other events this year have focused so heavily on the claims ecosystem and how we have to do better and be better. And it's all on the top of everybody's mind. And so, we all have the same goals at the end of the day to make a more cohesive ecosystem. But how can we help each other get there? I think is where we really struggle a little bit because no one wants to say they have any problems, right? Nobody wants to say that they're broken link. We all have broken links. We just need to kind of step in and fix them, right? So in your article, you described the loss of personal relationships between contractors and adjusters as a huge fault line. It's no secret. I think people talk about it quite often. Given the rise of desk adjusting and portal-based workflows, what practical steps can organizations take to help rebuild those interpersonal trust channels while still leveraging our digital tools? I know this one's a little hard because turnover is really high on all sides, actually, if I'm being quite honest. It does make it a little bit harder, but how can we strengthen those relationships or be a little bit more inviting, I guess is maybe the right question.
So phenomenal, phenomenal question. Again, I'm a dinosaur. So back when I was out in the field on either side, what I saw was two people having a connection, walking a project together, having a conversation. So we used to have adjusters and contractors who walk the projects themselves. They would be able to have specific discussions that were within that room. Again, I've got a whole series of the four elements of the scope. Those four elements are product or name, it's quality, quantity, and repair methodology. Of those four things, we typically only argue about one, and that is the quality of an item. Without being there in person, it's hard to have those conversations. The other thing is that there are subtle things that were missed, such as body language and nuisance that gets muttered. And now what I see so much, and again, I did not grow up in this era, so it's hard for me to talk about. I can only go off of what I hear. What I hear is it's a lot more email communication back and forth. It's less personal. It's less walking job sites together. And it's more of siloed. When I say siloed, it's what I have my expectation in my head versus what your expectation is in your head. And that's two parts of that triangle. And who's the one getting hurt here? The policyholder or the person that might be the very most important thing, which is who two masters are trying to serve anyway. Meaning they're trying to get that policyholder indemnified, a check cut, and they're trying to get the work done, the contractor. We're just trying to marry those three together. That's how I really see it.
No, I think that's a really great answer. And I will say too, speaking of having my own loss, I had a loss during COVID, which I think might have been a little bit more challenging anyway. But I didn't have an adjuster come out. I took my
Yeah,
own photos and I sent them,
correct.
right? I did all of the conversing between my carrier and my contractor. Thankfully, I'm in the industry, so I understand the process. I know who to call and ask questions. But to your point, there's no team playing, if you will, as much as there was previously. I don't want to say no team playing, but there's not as much of it happening as there was in prior years, right? I think technology has definitely put a damper on some of the things, but I think that's where we have to own that and say, hey, maybe we should be bringing back that walking the job together so you can understand the questions and maybe the discomfort that some people have when they're walking that job, right? Because to your point, you can't see body language, you can't hear tone in an email, right? So, what are
Yep.
your thoughts kind of on that? How can we maybe introduce that back into our ecosystem, if you will?
Yep. So here's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to share my screen out with you, Kayla. Hopefully you can see my screen
I
there.
can.
Okay. So where I'm going, let me just move this little bar so I give us the freedom of all the room here. Okay, Kayla, this is just human nature for you. So if I was to tell you it's 600,000 times faster to show you an image versus try to verbally describe something, would you believe me?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so how about if I told you this? Kayla, when we got here, we were literally pushing water out the door. right? You got that in your head?
Yes.
Okay. How about if I could use a tool like this to literally show you we were physically pushing water out the door, right? Me showing you this, it's funny whenever I do this that people instantly go, wow, that changes the complex right away. Right, because it takes what your expectation is and it clearly defines it. So all I'm showing you here, Kayla, is I'm using a 360 geospatial tool to say, how can we, like the number one killer in this business, the number one killer, in my opinion, is windshield time. Doesn't matter what side of the process you're on, windshield time's a killer. The average drive time is about 18 miles one way. It's about an hour and 20 minutes round trip. Why I'm bringing that up is if I could eliminate that for both parties and say, hey, let's sit here and do this meeting virtually on where we can both maximize our time by looking at the same thing at the same time in person. Now all I'm doing is using a tool to get sharper in my day to have a same discussion, just a little bit different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does 100%. And I will definitely say too, the power of images and just talking through it, like to your point, where we started on this image was, it's just a room. You can kind of tell that it's wet, the floor is wet or appears to be wet, right? Some people may just think that, wow, there's a great wax or a coating on the floor and the light's just
Yeah.
hitting it. But the moment that
Yeah.
you are able to show the
Yeah.
team working to push the water out of the building, now you can automatically have questions come to your mind and discuss that, right?
Right. Well, and Kayla, let's just look at something like a moisture point, right? I can't tell you how many times I've looked at this picture, and what I mean by this picture, I've seen this picture 100 times on a report, and it's like, hey, this is a Tramex non-penetrating moisture meter pegged out. Great. Well, I could have with until I show you that this is exactly where that is taken from. It could be anywhere in any room, but when I specify it's right here, it reduces our conversation because it's a visual story that the loss is telling itself. And why is it important? Let's go back to the restoration triangle. It's protecting all parties involved there and helping to frame and shape that communication.
No, 100%. And I will definitely say too, if the proactiveness is on both sides, you can actually shoot this over. I know you guys have some really cool links that you can shoot
Yes,
over. People can look at them and already have the questions by the time you get on the call. So that way you're
correct.
not losing any time or wasting any time, right? Let's be honest here too. Windshield time is a big thing, but all so is procrastination, if I'm being quite honest, right?
Absolutely.
And so
100%.
and I would say too, I mean, you wearing all these different hats, right, gives you a different perspective. And I would think too, you know, the adjusters obviously have a lot of stuff coming across their desk, right? I think their ratio to, policyholder or property owner is about the same as contractor to policyholder as well.
It's no, the reason why I laughed is to say, well, the contractor's the only one's having problems here. It's absurd because the adjuster has a mountain of pending files they have on their desk. That contractor has multiple projects they are trying to run on their desk, and the policyholder's dealing with a mess. So everyone's got problems. It's how can we take this particular project for all of those parties and start reducing some of those challenges and get on the common ground. And that, again, that's just one tool to be able to do it,
Yeah.
especially since we've lost so much of that personal touch. But that's just a little way I see it change, or it's changed in a huge way, but a little way you can make a huge difference.
Well, I would definitely say too, you're still able to have that personal connection by
Oh,
even on like how we're having this conversation. Granted, I see you several times a year, but these are amazing ways to show, hey, you can leverage technology to not one only benefit you, but also the other parties that are involved in this ecosystem that we work in every day. Let's be real. So, of course, I mentioned earlier that claims are such a huge topic of conversation all the time. It's just interesting that this year the focus has been on the entire ecosystem. You
yeah,
know, we know that clarity and transparency and shared data is something that's going to help us really just excel at bringing this restoration triangle together for good, honestly.
yeah,
How
yeah.
do you see 360 documentation fitting into that larger transformation of the claims ecosystem and not just the technology stack? And I say that because I think we've heard quite a few times that technology oftentimes gets put on the shelf in our industry. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I would say not just 360. It's some of the awesome tools that we're seeing in our industry. Let me give you an example. Um, there's some tools out there where you can collaborate in real time with a policyholder, with a contractor, et cetera. I'm saying any sort of digital technology. While I respect the 360 because that's the game I'm in, I also know there's a ton of other tools out there that can help during this entire the restoration triangle. So I would say that technology piece, it should absolutely remove any ambiguity, not create another dashboard or problem area for it. So if we look at this, any of these tools should do the following. They should share the same data going back and forth. Why is that important? Because it keeps it transparent. Okay. Why is that important? Because now we can come to standardization. Why is that important? Because now we have all the same education and we're talking from the exact same, I don't want to say mouth, but mind. And then another thing it does is it brings accountability to all parties. Every single person is accountable for that. So that's just some of the ways I see it, but especially we like what just impacted a lot of our viewers, listeners, whatever, Kayla, the winter storms. They're still impacting many people today. So when we start getting in cat events, it just magnifies this, or amplifies it even more. So that's how I see it.
No, I think that's a really great answer too, because I obviously live in the 360 documentation world. But I will say, since you've worn all hats, you've also seen the evolution of how technology
Yeah,
has evolved and made a difference, right? I think
yeah,
it's very interesting. Most of us in this industry experience our own loss, right? So at the end of the day, we get to see what the customer is feeling and hearing and seeing. We have a little bit of an advantage, I will say, because we are in the industry. So if we're feeling some of those pain points and we see that there's technology that's introduced to help alleviate those pain points, we can only imagine what it'll do for the end user at the end of the day, right? Somebody who has no idea what this whole process or ecosystem or restoration triangle is supposed to do and how it's supposed to function, right? At the end of the
yeah.
day, I think you said it best. We're all going to be on the same page, speaking the same lingo and having the same goal still. The goal has always been the same. I just think we're beating to different drums, if you will, to your point. So
Correct.
you mentioned that the solution isn't just better technology, right? But technology that solves the human problems that we're facing. So where do you think the industry is still missing the mark with the adoption of technology? And I think it may be one of those stresses where we try and juggle all the technology and don't really need it all. But what does tech that supports shared language look like in the workflow of the ecosystem?
Yeah. What I would say to that is basically if we start looking at how we're modernizing all of these processes, but yet we don't modernize our communication, then that restoration triangle, it's just going to continue to fracture.
Mhm.
And if we combine the technology with communication, then the ecosystem as a whole is going to get stronger. Like that's just the easiest way to put it. I mean, I don't even like when I was showing those images, I could it instantly gets you on the same communication path and it because it like I'm just going to use a really dumb example. When I used to look through 100 pictures of 100 different meter points inside that and to have to say, okay, is that coming from the living room or the dining room? Is that a non-penetrating? What I'm saying, it takes all of that out, which means it's reducing the speed that it takes to do something.
Mhm.
People have heard me say this a million times. What's the number one cost for any business? It's labor. So if I can start moving down what that labor cost is, then the contractor is going to have a higher profit margin. The insurance carrier is going to have a lower adjusting loss expense. Most importantly, the insured is going to get an indemnification check that much faster. We've gone from like 42 days back when I was a dinosaur roaming the earth down to like 7. And so you can just see it's all because of this technology, 100%.
Yeah, and I would definitely say too, I think you said something that was really critical for people listening. We have to evolve all aspects
Oh,
of what we do at the same time. Because if we
Yeah.
don't, to your point, now we're going to start seeing several little fractures within our triangle as a whole. Now we won't just have maybe one or two problems, it could turn into 10 plus problems. And so I know, excuse me, sometimes we're in the mindset of, hey, let's master this and then move to the next thing. But we have come to see that that's not how our industry works. That's not how the ecosystem works. And also, if we do have changes, we need to make sure that it's not a siloed approach, right? Like, oh, this
Mhm.
is changing for us over here. We don't need to tell the consumer and we don't need to tell the carrier, right? That's not really how we find success. And so, you know, one thing that I think is really important is that we all evolve at the same time and all of the aspects of whatever you're working on evolve together and not in different phases, because I think that's where we start to see additional problems or maybe technology implemented that doesn't need to necessarily be implemented into your business. It may cause additional problems. So if you had a crystal ball or if you could redesign the restoration triangle, what are some of the non-negotiable elements that you think must exist to repair the trust between contractors, carriers, adjusters, even the customers, especially as extreme weather has just started to pop up more and more? And not only that, additional disasters, fires by people starting them or just the drier climate. Like, what does that look like in Robb's mind if he could redesign the restoration triangle?
Yeah, well, if I could read, if I had a magic wand, I could do anything. I would create a pair of glasses that you put on, and everybody would see the same vision, because it's lack of interpretation, or it's when we start interpreting it through our own minds, is where we start running into problems. And some of those items I talked about, which are a shared data source, transparent documentation, it's creating a standard. That's where everything speeds up. And I'm going to lean a little bit back to my cat days when I was either a contractor or on the carrier side. The faster we could develop a process and that process was transparent and seamless, more work got done. That's just to say it was the assembly line of how to do things.
Mhm.
And if we can get back to doing that, again, I'm using cat because that is your most stressed or extreme environment. That's where we truly learn that we are able to do this at scale, at volume, very well, as long as everyone's looking through those same glasses, so to speak.
No, that's a great point. I will definitely say I think we're already moving in that direction, especially for 2026. I think is this is the most in 3 months that I have heard everybody on the same page, right? Like if I'm being honest, I've been in the industry for far less time than you, but in my, young 10 years of being in this industry, I don't think we've heard as much emphasis or maybe urgency behind people that are involved with the restoration triangle and the claims ecosystem. If I'm being quite honest, I think
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that?
So here's what I'll say. This is a controversial hot take for you, because one of the other things I didn't mention in my background is I've also built software. I've done it for a while now. And what I would say is, as someone that's building software, what we're building today is going to be obsolete in an hour. It used to be, hey, it would be obsolete in a week. Then it used to be, it'll be obsolete tomorrow. With now, some of the technology that we're building with all these like code writers and everything else, the hardest thing again, this is just my interpretation, when I was building software, was waiting on expensive and very talented coders, engineers, different people to put together a plan that would take weeks to build code to get you back to a beta place. We're seeing that technology being able to just springboard that. Why I'm bringing that up to you is all you and I have heard from every conference we've gone to is how important the ecosystem is. And I think as software builders, what people used to try to do is they would say, oh, we don't need to integrate or do that with this company. We're just going to go build it on our own. And what I can tell you based on my history, anytime you try to build it or do it on your own, it always costs more. It's always over budget. It's always never on time. So I think that's opened up to, yeah, it's a partnership. How can we all work together here? And it's, let me get the best of what Kayla's tool has to offer, or what my tool has to offer, or this person's tool. And now we're trying to look at it, again, that singular focus. Who is the restoration triangle, bringing it back to that policyholder. How do we make their experience as quick and as painless as possible, as well as everyone else involved in that restoration triangle?
Yeah, I will definitely say to your point. I also think too with the speed of acquisitions these days and things
Oh,
like that, there's no point of trying to stay in a little bubble or silo because at the end of the day, we all need each other. We all rely on each other. And so we have to make sure that we are able to integrate with our partners, but also stay compliant, right? I know SOC 2 compliance has been a really big topic of
huge,
conversation, right?
huge. Yep.
And it's not that it hasn't been, but I think with the ecosystem evolving and integrations being a bigger topic of conversation, it's really shown, we can do it. It's just going to take the right people in the right mindset to get us there. And I think we're in a really good space to do that. I mean, 2026 has been actually a really refreshing start. I know you've been feeling it too. So I think we covered a lot today. Do you have any closing words before we sign off, Rob?
No, here's what I would say is that I think, and this is getting outside the restoration triangle, but still applicable and very applicable to your last statement, is a lot of people now are looking at the tools and resources we have. This is a whole different topic for a whole different day. We start looking at artificial intelligence and how that's going to impact that restoration triangle. And what I would say is that the one thing I would say to all your users is start looking and investigating into these tools because that's going to make the difference. No different. And let me tell you why. I've literally seen now or talked to customers that have said, we've had our customer put photos through an artificial intelligence engine and come back with telling us what a scope should be, which has led to some interesting conversations. Now, I'm bringing it up, Kayla, just to say, as we start to evolve and we learn these tools and everything gets faster, make sure you can adopt and are staying current because it is going to change how it all interacts. And the reason why I bring it up is I was literally asked not too long ago, how fast until we get this done? Well, I think the realistic point of this is going to be a year and a half to 2 years. And people tell me I'm crazy. And they're like, Rob, no way. It's way faster than that. And I remind them, yes, I understand it's the technology can do it today, but until the DOIs and the regulatory bodies can get behind it and say people can use these tools, I don't see carriers adopting them that quickly or legally. So that's what I think the delay is going to be. It will not be on the speed of technology progressing. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah, and I would definitely say to your point, there's a lot of privacy that comes along in this,
Tons.
right? And so that's what really honestly plays into the speed or lack thereof it being speedy because a lot is at stake with personal information. We've heard how personal information has been compromised, and that's the last thing that anybody wants to do. And so doing it right, I think, is a little bit mm, some is not a little bit is something we need to emphasize better, that it's not about being fast, it's about being in the wavelength of doing things right, I guess. And my mind is
Yep.
thinking so much faster than my mouth is moving. So I'm like, well, wait a second, what am I trying to say? But no, truly, I think it's just one of those things in our industry. We are always in a hurry, and that's everybody in the ecosystem because we want to do what's right. We want to implement all these tools. But I think at the end of the day, privacy and security are really what slow us down. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's
No,
going
not at
to slow
all.
us down.
Right, right. And here's the interesting thing. I was privileged to listening to two very good friends of mine, great mentors. They were having a discussion whether a street address is PII, right? Let your audience think whatever they want. But we used to give this little thick book away that was white that had everyone's last name, home address, and phone number in it. And it's like, when did we stop giving out the white pages with information and that all of a sudden became PII? It's super interesting. We obviously ain't solving it today. I'm just saying there's a lot of things to think through to your point that's really engaging.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that might be another article and another conversation, right? No
Yes.
pressure to you, Rob. But as always, for all of you watching, thank you for tuning into this episode of Ask the Expert. We'll see you next time. Take care.